Hello, this is John Kranz with Compass Games. I want to welcome you. This is episode 48, but we are doing a pre-recorded session. Unfortunately, given my schedule for today, I'm unavailable in the evening to do our live broadcast. So what we've done instead is we've done this pre-recorded session to give you the latest updates, including our release schedule. And then we do have a designer interview also as part of this episode. Again, pre-recorded. I'm going to have to anglicize his name, however. I'm going to butcher it, but it's Javier García de Gabiola. And of course, that's not the proper pronunciation, but he is the designer of the Napoleonic Wars, and he is based out of Madrid, Spain. So given we also had some time zone challenges as well, we really wouldn't have been able to do a live broadcast with Javier as well for this evening. So we've got a pre-recorded designer interview that we're going to be getting to here in a moment. But first, let's go ahead and give you an all-important update as to our schedule. First, just a reminder on the left, as always, we like to mention the newsletter you can subscribe to. We'll have one going out actually later today, the 28th of January, 2021. Then in the bottom right corner, where you see me saying "Talk to us" and waving, that's where you can reach us with any general feedback or suggestions that you may have for us. Please keep in mind, if you're looking for customer service, the best way forward would be to send an email to sales@compassgames.com. That way you take me out as the middleman and you can get customer service help right away. But again, we love to hear from you, and we typically use your comments in our bi-weekly town hall sessions with Bill Thomas. So let's get to the update, and I'm going to zoom in here to view the update a little better as far as our schedule goes. So for upcoming titles, we've just updated the schedule, so I do want to spend a moment on that. As a matter of fact, late breaking news this morning was we had to just shuffle the shipping date for Paper Wars. Had to push it back just a little bit. So our next release will actually be a standalone board game, which will be No Motherland Without. We've done a great interview already with Dan Bullock, the designer, which you can catch on our channel. And again, No Motherland Without, that will be shipping next on February 8th. Again, Paper Wars was pushed a little bit, so we're going to begin shipping Paper Wars with Rally Around the Flag, which actually features 2 different Civil War battles in the magazine. That's going to be shipping on February 20th. And then very special for me, because it's on my birthday, is Doomsday, Episode 1, Battle for Germany. That's going to be shipping on February 28th. So that's our lineup for February. So again, just a slight adjustment with Paper Wars trading slots with No Motherland Without. And we're, of course, very excited to get that board game out from Dan Bullock. Then we have a very busy March and April schedule. So as you can see here, for March, we're going to have Indian Ocean region. And that is really the follow-on title or sequel for South China Sea. And I'm going to mention South China Sea here in a moment as far as the schedule. But Indian Ocean region will be first in March, followed by The Lamps Are Going Out, which I know a lot of folks have been waiting for. So I know that's a highly anticipated release for the second edition. And then we have Bruce Maxwell's NATO, The Cold War Goes Hot, the designer signature edition. It's really a brand new game, much different than the Victory Games version. And Bruce has done some interviews with several content creators and YouTube channels, really getting into the details of how NATO has changed significantly. So we're really excited to have NATO coming out end of March. And then to round out April, we actually have 4 titles for April. So for April, we've got Paper Wars 97, which is Michael Resch's Battle for Galicia. So that was actually a desktop published game that he did under his flagship name was Oregon Con Sims. And so Michael Resch, we're doing the professional version of it with, the mounted counters, etc. in Paper Wars. That's going to be out in April. And that's going to be a fantastic game. Those that have the print and play version, etc., really love the game. Then we have Napoleon's Imperium that will be released, and that's actually on Kickstarter right now. So the Kickstarter for Napoleon's Imperium is actually ending soon. So we're going to be having it mentioned in our newsletter that's going out today. And then we have Joe Bukowski's The Korean War Designer Signature Edition. Yes, we had it slated for March, but as Bill mentioned in the town hall meeting, he needs a little bit bigger time window for the files to arrive back from the printers and to go through the final QA inspection for the game. So we've just pushed it back just a little bit into April, but we'll be on schedule there. And then we have the War Pacific. That will be the final game released in April. Since we had Cradle of Civilization on the schedule, it did bump back a little bit. So I did want to just mention that in May, Cradle of Civilization will be happening. I didn't want to leave it off the list and have it disappear, as people would probably be asking, what happened to the game. So that was pushed back a little bit. So Cradle of Civilization will be in May. And as I mentioned, there's a few more games that I do want to mention as far as our schedule goes. It doesn't fit on our 90-day window schedule here, but let me provide you a little more information about what else we can expect in May. So I mentioned earlier, Indian Ocean region is going to be out in March. So we have South China Sea. That's a straight reprint of the game. That's going to be available in May, just to let you know. So a lot of people ask, with Indian Ocean region coming out, when will South China Sea reprint be available? It's going to be available in May. Same goes for the War, the Pacific. So that's a new title coming from Ernie Copley. And people are asking about, what about the War Europe? And yes, that one is also going through a reprint. And that will also be released as a reprint in May. So both those games that I'm mentioning, South China Sea and the War Europe, those are just straight reprints of. So if you have the original edition, it's pretty much going to be the same game. Just to let you know. So did want to get that information out. And I can share with you some other titles for May. Again, we just couldn't fit them on the schedule here, but we do have a preliminary schedule for May. Besides those two reprints I've just mentioned, we have Napoleon's Eagles 2 from Christopher Moeller. That will be released in May, as well as Granada. Granada's really getting a lot of attention too. It's a fabulous looking game, and we're looking also at May for Granada. And then, since we did do a Kickstarter recently, I want to mention just briefly that Armageddon, the Battle for Armageddon, is slated right now for a June release. So there will be obviously more in June, and as we get closer to the schedule, when we get into the April-May timeframe, of course, there might be some adjustments. But again, this is a pretty big update as far as the next 90-day window. And also, I just wanted to give you this reprint news about some certain titles as well. So that rounds out our release schedule update. So if you have any questions, you can use that Talk to Us link, and I'll be happy to get back to you. We do have other games that are done, but it's just a matter of Bill's trying to decide the best time to release games. So, for example, Imperial Tides, a World War I strategic game by Gregory M. Smith. Game's basically done, but we do have the lamps are going out, second edition coming out already in March. So we're just trying to get some good dates staggered, so we don't have perhaps the same topic, same strategic level of a game coming out right at the same time. And since we have so many games we have to get out, actually, we've basically decided, there's certain games we're gonna just try to release later. And we can't release all the games at once that are available to ship. It would just be too much. So there are other games that are definitely going through the pipeline and getting finished up. But again, as always, as Bill mentions in his town hall sessions, he's going to be setting the schedules for those. But as you can see here, we have a good 90-day plus outlook for you as far as what's going to be happening. So next thing I do want to mention is, and this will be featured in our newsletter again, so please sign up to the newsletter if you can. It's our holiday catalog, and the holiday catalog is actually going to be ending end of this month in 3 days. So it's very important. It's ending January 31st, so it's really important that we mention that these sales are going away. So as you know, it's a 35% discount on all in-stock items, and you can click and download the catalog, the PDF right here. So again, this is really a last and final call for our 2020 holiday catalog sale. I know a lot of you have taken advantage of the sale, but I think it's a good time just to mention that it's going away, pretty much just over this weekend, end of the weekend. So if there's something perhaps you didn't pick up, or you want to revisit the catalog just in case, because we do have those special prices that will be expiring after the 31st. Definitely recommend you take a quick look at the catalog. And also as a reminder, and these are also featured in the catalog, and this is something that Bill Thomas also covered in a previous town hall session. There are certain games that have been in stock for quite a long time, several years. So really, once they go out of print, as Bill mentioned, he doesn't really expect or plan to reprint them. That it'll be sort of a one and done type of a release. So as you see here, I have various titles mentioned here. And if you, again, look at the catalog, you might want to reconsider, picking up these at the special price by the 31st, because once they are gone, they are absolutely gone. I believe all these titles are still in stock. I don't know. You might want to check on Guam, perhaps, because I know that's been a popular title. As it was mentioned, it's going to be probably not reprinted, and same for a few others like Red Star, White Eagle. So, you want to definitely check and get that order in for the special savings before the holiday sale is over. So as mentioned, we're going to be focusing on Coalition. So again, I do apologize. I'm just going to be out this evening, and we couldn't do a live interview with Javier because he's based out of Madrid, Spain, and the time zone differences just really wouldn't have made that possible. So what we'll do now is we'll simply segue to the interview that I did. We actually conducted the interview yesterday. And just to let you know, again, since it's a sort of a long distance interview and bandwidth, at times during the broadcast, yes, there will be the video, and sometimes even the audio might break up a little bit, but it's the best we could do as far as what the internet would provide us from overseas. So the good news is, you'll understand Javier for sure when he talks about Coalition. Really does a good high level overview of the game for everybody, and it is our latest shipping product. So we literally just shipped Coalition, and people may have not even received the game yet. So it's probably arriving right now for a lot of folks. So we think it's just great timing that we had a moment with Javier where we could sit down with him, get to know him a little bit better, as we always like to do with designers, and really get a little more in-depth discussion about his new game Coalition. So again, sit back and relax, and I hope you enjoy the overview, which we're going to go ahead and cut over to right now. And I look forward to seeing you next week for our next town hall session. Take care, everybody. Let's go now to the interview. Hello, everybody. This is John Kranz with Compass Games. I'm delighted to bring you a special recorded session, an interview with the designer of Coalition. I'm going to be greeting him shortly, but we're really excited to have Javier joining us today. Again, the game that we're going to be talking about is the brand new release from Compass Games. It's Coalition, the Napoleonic Wars, 1805 to 1815. It's a strategic level game. It's also a multiplayer game as well. So we're really excited to be talking about that game today. So let's go ahead and let's bring in and introduce Javier. So Javier, how are you doing today?
Hi, John. It's nice to meet you. I'm fine. I'm very happy to be here for talking with you.
Well, we're really excited to talk to you today because obviously we're talking about your new release, which we're showing here, which is Coalition. It just started shipping from Compass Games, so it's really a brand new release. I don't know if anybody has even received the game yet in the mail. Maybe it's just going to be starting to arrive as people watch this recorded interview that we're doing right now. But yes, again, we're really excited to be talking to you about the game. But before we start talking about Coalition, I do want to ask you a few questions. First of all, your accent, I notice, is a little different than my accent. So I need to ask, where do you live? Where are you joining us from today?
I'm Spanish from Europe, because some people confuse the Spanish from Latin America with the Spanish from Europe. I'm from Europe.
Yes.
So I was born in Barcelona, but I'm living in Madrid since I have 3 or 4 years old. So that's the reason for my accent.
That's wonderful. So I've visited Madrid, but I have not visited Barcelona. But obviously, Madrid.
You did good. Well, you did good because it's better Madrid than Barcelona.
Oh, is it? Okay.
Yeah, you know that we have this. We have this, opposition between these two cities, and
boy.
I prefer Madrid.
You prefer Madrid. Well, that's great. Thanks for joining us from Madrid. And could you tell us a little bit? We're going to talk about your game design, but if you don't mind sharing, perhaps what you do, like during the day, if there's a type of job or career you have, people are always interested in knowing what you do. Perhaps if you could share.
Yeah, sure. I'm a lawyer. I work for an American company, for an American multinational. So I negotiate the contracts with customers in the region of Southern Europe. So this is my job that makes me earn my life. Yeah. And also as a hobby, I write articles of history, of military history in magazines in Spain. And I began also publishing some articles in some U.S. magazines and in a Dutch magazine. Nice. So it's my hobby, but as I said, I earn my life as a lawyer. Not a lawyer for litigation, but a lawyer for negotiate contracts with customers.
Wonderful. Now, I'm aware of, actually, when I was in Madrid long ago, I became familiar with a magazine called, I'm going to mispronounce it, I'm sure, Alea?
Alea, yeah.
So is that a magazine that I know you're familiar with it because it's in your home country, but have you published any articles?
No. But Alea, I think this was several years ago, because Alea was a magazine for games.
Yes.
It included also some articles of history. Yes. And it included also a board game inside the magazine. But I think that this magazine closed some years ago. But yes, I knew Alea. It was an interesting magazine.
Yeah, I know we have some game collectors in our audience that are Compass customers, and they're pretty familiar with Alea magazine. I'm sure they're more familiar with it than I am. But I have a few issues I picked up in the 1990s. I think it was a very interesting magazine. Okay, great. Well, thanks for sharing a little bit about what you do. So let's now focus a bit more on the hobby now, and we're going to talk about your design in a second. But how did you get introduced to wargaming as a hobby? Were you very young? Was it a young age, or how did you get introduced to games?
I was a child, a kid. I have, I think, 7 or 8 years old or something like that. And I received my first board game that it was called La Guerra Civil Española, Spanish Civil War. It was a Spanish game from a extincted Spanish company. Yes. And I began playing this game with my brother and with my older brother. So he explained to me the rules, and we were playing together. And I discovered this world, so I began every year for Christmas. I asked for a new game, so I received a new game.
That's great.
It's great.
That's wonderful. That's wonderful. Did you have a particular game you have fond memories of that you really enjoyed as a kid playing, or is there a favorite? Do you have like a favorite game that you've played in the past?
Yeah, I have several ones. First of all, these games of this disappeared Spanish old company, its name was NAC and Cooper. The name was fake because they were Spanish, and there were no Nike, there were no Cooper in the company, but they have this name. This company disappeared, and then I moved to Avalon Hill Games with my colleagues from school, and I love especially not very complicated games. In fact, a bit simple ones, as Kingmaker, for example. I love Kingmaker.
That's a very popular. That's a very popular game. Kingmaker.
For me, it mixes the simplicity with the atmosphere and a realistic view of the time, but in a simple way. So I'm very for the event cards, being very easy to play again and again. Yes. So I love Kingmaker, also War and Peace. And
War and Peace,
it was inspiration for Coalition, in fact. And also Victory in the Pacific. These were more or less my favorite games.
As Avalon Hill had so many classic games, so many great games. Well, that's wonderful. So you had a nice introduction at a very early age, actually, 8 years old. That's quite young.
I was very young. Yeah,
that's very young. And then we're going to talk about your game design shortly. But I'm aware that you actually designed a game before Coalition, so did a little research. Could you tell us a little bit about Cuba, the Splendid Little War? I don't know if that was your first game design. I believe it was Victory Point Games, if I'm not mistaken. It was published. Could you share a little bit about what your first game design, what that was?
Yeah, well, it was a game of the the people in the USA when we talk about the Spanish-American War in 1898. People think that there was just a clash between USA and Spain, and that's all. But Spain was fighting during 3 years before with the Cubans, in a large and crude guerrilla war. So Spain created more or less the first counter-insurgency tactics and strategies, and the Cubans were more or less the first to implement the typical guerrilla tactics of destruction of property, evading, fighting, etc. So I created a design that was focused in this part of the war between the Spanish and the Cubans, but then there were some variables. There was a track tracking when the USA entered the war for certain facts, and then when the USA entered the war, the game changes and it turned into a conventional war. So the game covered both types, both epochs, no? The Spanish-Cuban War and then the Spanish-American War.
Both periods. Okay.
Exactly.
And that was your first design published, correct?
Yeah, exactly.
So what made you decide? So I always like to ask the question: how do you go from playing games like Avalon Hill or whatever you're playing to decide? Oh no, I actually want to actually design my own game. What gave you the idea? And what motivated you to say, I want to design a game? How did that happen for you?
Well, I'm a very imaginative person. I have
but you're a lawyer. No,
yeah, I'm a lawyer, so I have to be creative. I have to be creative to find arguments to defend something that is not defendable or something like that.
Arguments, absolutely.
No, but I began very early because when I was a teenager, I began designing my own games because I love history. My father told me about the history of Spain when we were traveling by car, hours and hours. He was driving and he was talking to me the history of Spain of all times. So I love history. So I decided, hey, there are so many wars, interesting wars that has not their own game. So I decided to create my own games. Obviously, they were very basic.
You started young.
With 15 years.
That's
different. 15 years old, 16 years old, something like that. And I created these games and I played them with my brother. In most cases, I only begin, these games as an exercise, but I did not end it. I ended one about the Battle of Austerlitz, and I tested it with my brother. But then, I had perhaps 20 years old or something like that. Oh, wow. This game disappeared with one of my mother's cleanings of
You got Austerlitz got outflanked by your mother cleaning. It was outflanked. It sounds like
exactly.
Oh, that's too bad. It's too bad to hear that. Well, that's interesting because most designers that we talk to, they started with maybe play testing for a company, helping a designer, or they did their own little kits, their own little add-ons. They would tinker and change a game that somebody else designed. But you actually started very young. You actually just were, like you said, you were a very creative person, and you just started doing your own ideas it sounds like as a teenager, very young. So that's different than the typical answer we get. So that's very interesting. So how did you come about deciding? Let's talk about Coalition for a second. So what gave you the idea? I know you've mentioned War and Peace. You've mentioned Austerlitz. I sense some interest in Napoleonics, obviously, here from what you've said already. But what made you decide to focus on this game? Was it the topic, Or was it the game? You had a game system idea. Did you have an idea to do a multiplayer game, and you have to decide later what the topic is, or did you decide first? No, I want to do the Napoleonic Wars. I'm curious how you decided approaching the project.
I decided that my idea was to create a game about the Napoleonic Wars because I love this period since I was also a child. And also there is a film from Ridley Scott that is called The Duelist. It's wonderful, and it's an incredible film.
Great film.
Yeah, exactly. Absolutely. And I love this. These times, this epoch. And also, when I was a child, I played with my friends. I remember that I played long sessions of War and Peace. These Avalon Hill games with several players. But it has, every turn was 1 month. So to play a game,
takes a long time to play. And yours is one turn is 1 year, so it's much faster.
Yeah, exactly. So I turned this because I love the idea of War and Peace in the sense of having several players, each one controlling one country, having generals, being more or less realistic with the troops and the events, but also trying make a game to be played because I have 47 years old and I work, I have a family, I don't have the time to dedicate to play in long sessions.
Right. So basically something like War and Peace. So decided, So you had the idea, strategic level, but not 1 month per turn. It's something that needs to be finished. Maybe what we say that here, it's one sitting, maybe finish in a few hours. It could be done one time and then you're done. And here I actually have the product page. So I'll make this a little bit larger here so everybody can see it perhaps a little bit better. But here's the product page on the Compass site. So we have some images here, which I'll show in a moment. I'm actually going to show the Kickstarter page as well, because your game was also a very successful Kickstarter for Compass. But it does talk about it's for 2 to 6 players. So multiplayer, as you mentioned. And then I can see the focus is really that it's playable in several hours. And it mentions the games. You actually go through how easy it is, how quick you can finish a turn. You actually give this demonstration in this text, in these paragraphs here, talking about here's how a turn might go. So it's very obvious the game moves fairly quickly, but I'm sure the decision making is where the challenge is, how to play well and be successful in the game. But you also introduced 3 card decks, so that's something that's different than, say, War and Peace. So could you talk a little bit about how the cards are being used? And I'll actually switch over. I'll show the Kickstarter page because we have some cards on here, I believe, that I can show. So let me just scroll down. We've got the markers, but I want to get to some of the cards, which I believe we have. Oh, you know what? The cards are in the rules. I'll have to show that later. So can you tell us a little bit about, the game cards, how the cards are used in the game?
In fact, there is a large deck for event cards. I think that the event cards are basic for a game. I don't like the typical event cards that you have to choose between paying action points or using the card. The action card creates the event card creates the atmosphere of the game. So you have always, if possible, to play this card to create a special event. I don't know, Napoleon divorced Josephine, the revolution of 2nd of May in Spain, and these events creates the atmosphere. So these events card are the largest deck in the game. They create new rules, new specific or special rules for special circumstances, and I think is the spirit of the game. But there is also a little deck that is a coalition deck, because the British player has to organize coalitions to stop Napoleon, and the idea was to avoid the typical game when 4 players make an ally against 1 or 2 other players for all the game. I was trying to move this system of alliance so the British could launch a coalition card to force several players to be aligned in favor of the British side. No? So, but these coalitions end. So if the coalition is not destroyed, after the second turn, the coalition ends and the player recovers their ability to change alliances and becoming pro-France, or still becoming pro-British. So the British player has to launch another coalitions to force again the other player to be in his faction. And the third deck of cards is a kind of they are home cards that summarize exactly. That summarize more or less some special rules for every country.
Yes.
Reinforcements, because the armies has to be paying recruitment points, but they are available at certain turns, as happens with the generals, and also some generals and armies are retired from the game at certain turns. So these home cards summarize the special rules of this country, the special surrender conditions, and also the reinforcement of this country, and it also operates as a kind of force pool to play over the card the counters that you could play, but you are not playing in this moment.
So, and I'm actually showing the home cards is actually in the upper left for everybody looking on the screen. We have the home cards upper left. The event cards is on the left page. It's the bottom right, which is the invasion of Russia, is what it says. And then you mentioned the coalition cards, which is on the other page. You can see it says coalition clearly. Now, for the home cards, is it just one card per power, per major power or minor power, or do you have multiple home cards depending on the scenario, or is it just one card covers everything?
Yeah, just one card for country.
Okay, it sounds like it's a great player aid idea, actually.
Major power or minor power.
Yeah. Okay, and then in the event cards, now how do the event cards get played? How do you introduce event cards during play in the game? How do the events cards get used?
Yeah, well, there is no strict rule about using the event card. You use your if you win a certain amount of action points per turn, then you have the right to draw for 2, 3, or 4 event cards at the beginning of the turn. You may use them in general in your turn, in whatever phase. In some cards, it appears the concrete phase when it has to be played. For example, play this card in the political phase, or play this card in the action phase. But in general, more or less, you have every moment to play the card, except some special cards that are called reaction cards, and reaction cards could be played in your enemy's turn
during the opposition. So you can react and respond to certain events that the other players are attempting against you. I'm sharing the map now a little bit, and actually let me just zoom in for a moment. I want to show everybody the map. So it's just to let everybody know, it's a single but fully mounted game map, which is a great in terms of quality. Great to see that. So I want to ask you, can you explain to us what we see here on the map? I see the event card pile decks. I see in the upper left, we've got, of course, the game turn track, but it looks like we've got some victory point, recruitment, economic point tracks. Can you explain a little bit about what we're seeing on this game map for everybody?
Yeah, on the left side, as you said, there are the turns of the game from 1805 to 1815, but there is also an abridged version that you play 2 years per turn to make the game faster. And below you have the victory points, and because there are several ways to win the game. Obviously, the most simple way is to surrender. For the French player to force the surrender of Great Britain, imposing an economic blockade, or invading the United Kingdom and destroying their armies. But if it doesn't happen, you could win the game by earning victory points, and the victory points are counted at the end of the game for the countries or fortress that you have conquered, or even if you have forced the surrender of France, for example, in the case of the UK, or even if France has conquered or Spain has conquered Gibraltar, for example, it gives also victory points. But as I discovered when I was playtesting the game, that some players were using Fabian tactics, avoiding battles, avoiding fighting, and then they make the last efforts in the last turns of the game. So at the end,
oops, sorry, you're cutting out a little bit here. I think
becoming
we have a video feed problem.
The scenes later. Oh, sorry.
Yep.
Well,
that's no problem. It's
what
not
I was
you,
saying is that as I discovered, it's the signal or whatever.
Yes. Yes.
Well, what I decided was to create the Glock points. The Glock points are, the glory points. It seems that every turn when you defeat an army, or you conquered a country, or you take a fortress, you win a Glock points. You win these points along the game, and per 10 Glock points, you win 1 extra victory point.
Okay.
To be added to your
added to your totals for sorry, the video feeds
force players. Okay, so as I said, this was a way to force the player to play actively.
Yes.
During all the game, to win Glock points, to be counted at the end of the game, instead of waiting just for the last 1 or 2 turns to move your armies and conquer something to win the points. No, so it was a force to avoid fighting tactics and
to make all the players active and engaged.
Be more active along the game.
What are we seeing here? So I'm looking at the Kickstarter page that we have for the game. What is this example showing? It looks like we have an attack that's taking place here against the British, against Wellington. Can you describe what would be happening in the game? It looks like we have Napoleon and Blucher.
Yeah, exactly. Well, Well, this was an example of play that was the 100 Days, the Waterloo campaign. So, the game could be played in very few time. So here we have I think it has 2 strength points. I don't have the glasses where, but it has 2 strength points, if I'm not mistaken. Yeah. And he's trying to attack Wellington with the Allied army. Wellington has a value of 2 in when defending, and Napoleon has also a value of 2 when attacking. That adds to the dice roll. But then in farther below, you may see Blucher that joins to the battle. Blucher is in the first graphic. You may see in the below part of the first graphic. Exactly. You may see Blucher that is joining to the battle. Blucher is a maneuver leader, as Napoleon. A maneuver leader could join into another stack, exactly, to engage in a battle, or could avoid a battle. For example, if a maneuver leader is attacked, the maneuver leader could make an evasive maneuver to avoid the combat. So these are some advantages that has the maneuver leaders. He has a Blucher, as happened historically, joined to the battle. He ran to the sound of the guns and joined to Wellington and saved the day for Wellington in Waterloo. No? So at the end, you add the points of Blucher army and the points of Wellington and of the British, and the proportions are higher for the Allied player.
Well, it sounds nice. It sounds like you said, there's a lot of engagement. There's a lot of mechanics in your system to force some action, it sounds like you were saying earlier. And then the leaders have certain characteristics to be mobile, to actually engage in battles. So it sounds very dynamic. And then you have options, like you said, with the event cards, and through the reaction cards, there's other things that are happening as well. So we take a step back just for a moment and just share with everybody how many scenarios there are in the game? And could you talk about, I believe it says from 2 to 6 players. So do you have a recommended number of players? Like how many players you think is best for the game for certain scenarios? I'm curious about the scenarios and the 2 to 6 player range. What you think about that?
Well, I test the game for the 2 players version. There is a 2 players version. That one player controls the British Empire and their allies that are forced by coalitions, and the French player that controls Spain at the beginning of the game, and then any other countries that they could conquer. And there is another option that is to play several players. With several players, it could be 3, 4, 5, until 6 players.
Yep.
Obviously, I recommend to play with 6 players. Is the funniest way to
it's the best,
to play the game. Obviously, the length of the game is the duration is larger, but it's wonderful because every country has their own agenda. For example, Spain, that in theory has less power than any other countries, but it's very difficult to invade Spain. And has their own objective as taking Gibraltar. They have also their fleet that could cooperate with the French to try to invade France. Prussia is also an interesting country, but at the end is the battlefield of all Europe. All the Russians and Austrian armies and French armies used to engage themselves in Prussia. So and Prussia is not so strong that it could appear. So they have to be very careful to avoid to be constantly invaded. Russia is very powerful, but is very far from the front, so they have to cross half Europe to go into the battle. But in the meantime, it may conquer, for example, Poland. So the Prussian player could have,
Poland. Poland
exactly.
Has a bad.
Poland is in the middle of everything.
Exactly. Always, it's so sad.
Yeah.
So, and then there's you mentioned the scenarios. The scenarios, there's more than one scenario where you can change the length. So one turn, instead of being a year, can be 2 years. So I think that's what you said is the difference in terms of how you can play the game. You can do different scenarios.
It's not exactly scenarios. It's an option to play a shorter game. For example, if you want to play with 6 players, but you don't have 2 evenings to play, you may use, for example, the shorter scenario to, despite playing with 6 players, to make the game faster. You have a common phase that is the phase of the political phase and recruitment phase, but the action phase happens in 2 years instead of 1 year. It's like a summary of the normal version. I don't have the typical scenarios. I created them. I have them in draft. My idea was to publish them in your magazine, in Paper Wars. Exactly.
Perfect. Yeah.
Or even if there is a re-edition of the game, we could incorporate. For example, there is a scenario very interesting that is the fall of Napoleon, that begins from 1812. The invasion of Russia, but then all the tide.
Exactly.
Against France.
Back.
This is very interesting. And there is also another scenario that is only the war for Spain, the peninsular campaign with Napoleon invading Spain, Wellington, the battles between Spanish and British versus French armies. So it's also a scenario that I drafted and I created. I should have to test them, obviously, and needs to be polished and clean.
Yeah, we could have it released later. Absolutely. So it sounds like we got some additions. That's nice. We can have some additions to add to the game. It's already a complete game, obviously, for 2 to 6 players. But it's nice to know there could be some bonus material that we could maybe release later in Paper Wars, or a new edition or deluxe second printing. So that's really great to hear. And even you may use the example of play of the last turn, that is the Waterloo campaign, as a one-turn scenario, because all the counters are placed there, so you may use it also as a one-turn scenario to play in 30 minutes or 20 minutes, and that's all, a very fast one. Good training scenario. Good way to start to learn the system a little bit. That sounds great. So I want to ask you some design questions. So now, since we're talking about Coalition quite a bit now, I want to ask you, what was the toughest part of designing the game, as far as doing the design, the mechanics? Was there anything that you found you had to put more attention towards until you were satisfied with how it was working? I'm curious about your design process for the game.
Well, it's curious because you have in your brain, you have an idea of the game, but when you create the prototype and you test it, you discover that some things that in your brain function perfectly, it was not the case. So you have to write the rules, amend the rules according to the experience of the play testing. Even you may play test the game 1 or 2 times, and nothing strange happens. But then you test the game
Yeah.
I don't know, 3 weeks later, and you discover, hey, this is new. And this should not happen. So you have to make some adaptations, and also there is a constant fighting between the playability of the game and the reality. I love history, so I'm always trying to be as much history reliable as possible. But sometimes you have to compromise between the playability and the history. It's not always easy.
Yeah. I hope the event cards help with that a little bit, that you can introduce the history through event cards. It seems to be a pretty popular mechanism to help these strategic level games. What about the playtesting, though? Oh, go ahead. Sorry, So I was going to say event cards probably helped with that.
Yeah, the event cards, exactly. They are great because you may create a general rule for all the game, but then to use an event card that creates exceptions to the rule for a concrete event. So you are adapting the game to the reality, and you are, hey, it functions this way, but with this event card, you may do this, for example, move twice, or for example, change the alliance of a player in the middle of a turn. So you change the rules and create exceptions that are historically realistic, but doesn't complicate the game, because it only happens one time or two times. So it's an excellent tool to adapt the game to the reality, but not destroying the playability of the game.
Right. So it sounds like the home cards are going to be key also, because per the history of the period for the major and minor powers, it sounds like the characteristics, the capabilities or limitations of the powers are captured on the home cards a little bit with what you have to work with, it sounds like. So I wonder, strategy must be very interesting for this game, especially for multiple players, because each major or minor power, like you said about Spain earlier, about Gibraltar, the Navy, and maybe doing cooperation with France, and then Russia has the overland issue. So it sounds like there's not going to be a single strategy that works for all powers, that it's going to depend which power you're playing, and you're going to have to play that power a certain way. Again, based on the cards also that are happening. So it sounds like this isn't the kind of game that has the perfect strategy to play. As I can't play the French one day and then do the Prussians and play them the same way. I would fail because there's different characteristics. Would that be a correct assumption I'm making, that you need to play differently per the power you have?
Exactly, because at the end, this is a kind of asymmetric game. Every power has their own strengths and weakness, and it's not the same playing with Austria than playing with Russia, than playing with the British Empire, than playing with France. They are totally different. For example, the French player should use the beginning of the game when he's stronger. He has the best generals. He has Napoleon, that is excellent. He has Soult. He has also Massena, to try to conquer as much as possible, destroy every coalition, to win glory points, because later some of their best generals disappear. Also, they could be launched stronger coalitions with better generals against France, and then it begins the retiring of the French. So later is a time of trying to survive and not winning glory points that are going to be won by the other players. And also, every country has a different way to surrender. That is based in historic investigation. Austria has surrender conditions different than Prussia, than Russia, than France, than Spain, and the UK. These surrender conditions are stated in the home cards, and also there is a table that summarizes the surrender conditions. Right. So you should change your strategy.
Yes.
Whether you are playing with Russia or whether we are playing with Austria, for example. Right. You cannot trust even your allies, because at the end you have to win victory points. So, for example, Austria could be your ally, the British ally with Russia, and Russia against the French, but they conquer Italy, they conquer Naples, they try to conquer Germany, and Prussia say, hey, you're living to win team, so you're in a war between Prussia and Austria. Exactly. And Poland, as I said, is a candy, very succulent to be tasted by Russia.
Poor Poland. We have to do a game focused on Poland during the period, just all the struggles they had. I feel so bad for Poland. It's such a sad thing. But it sounds like the replay value of the game is going to be tremendous, because you've got with the event cards and the alliances, and when the alliances happen, coalitions, how they go into effect, and the different characteristics. It sounds like I could play this game 5 or 6 times, even playing the same site each time. If I just stayed as the French and did it several times, sounds like the outcome could be very easily very different based on what the other powers are doing. For sure.
Exactly. This happened also with my previous game with Cuba, the Little Splendid War, that the replayability was huge for the event cards. And here, in addition, you have the coalition cards. So perhaps the British player has to pay 2 action points for receiving a coalition card. But he could receive a poor coalition in the first turn, or he could receive a tremendous coalition in the first turn, for example. So the game could totally be different from one game to other. And also the event cards could create different scenarios, different situations. Event cards could force France, for example, to invade Spain, or could force France to invade Russia. Decisions that probably a French player, a sound French player, would never take, but is forced to do this for the event. So there are different situations.
Yeah, forced due to the situation.
Exactly.
Well, let me do this. I want to point out for the viewers, especially if they've ordered the game and maybe they're still waiting to receive it, I want to recommend our Kickstarter page. If you go do a search on Kickstarter for Coalition, you'll find the game there. You'll also see some additional graphics, which I think are always worth taking a quick look at, especially if you haven't received the game yet. But I want to point out again at the very bottom, there's some of the different markers in the game as well, how they're used. But at the very bottom of the page, as we do with all our Kickstarters, is we have the rule booklet. So you just click here so you can preview the rules online. And one thing I want to thank you for doing, and first of all, the rules are very short. It's near the end at 18 pages only and not much text. Lots of images, but you do something called the 100 Days Campaign in 10 minutes. It's in the last column on the right here with the 7th Coalition card. And it actually goes on for another few pages. It shows the illustrations of how you would actually play the game, which is really a nice guide. So we've got 3 full pages illustrated of going through the 100 Days Campaign in 10 minutes. So that's a great way to get started. I know the game's not very complex to begin with, but it's always, I think, helpful for players just trying to get started with the game to actually be able to walk through how you would actually play the game and what's happening. So I want to commend you for doing that. I think that's wonderful that you included that with the game. That's definitely going to be helpful to the players. So that game, it's game shipping now. Just to remind people, the game is shipping now. You can order it direct from Compass Games. So I want to ask you the next obvious question. Now that you've done these 2 published designs, do you have any interest to design? Well, since you've been doing it since a child, I'm hoping you're still interested. Any new design ideas or any topics of interest you're thinking about right now?
It's curious because in some cases I was contacted for some editors for games. And I give to them a list of topics that I'm working. So not a single one, but several topics that I'm working. Yeah, exactly. At the same time, some at in a midterm evolution. Yeah. Others are near finish. Others are in the beginning. The last. I have one game that is called Pocket Overlord. That is the Normandy landings until the Operation Cobra. It's probably will be published in Spain, but I don't have a date. It also includes event cards, and I have also a design that I'm now finishing. I still is not finished, but I have no editor for the moment. That is called Independence. That is a game of the American Independence War with the
American Independence War. Great.
Exactly,
okay.
With the British. Wonderful. And it's trying to make it simple, fast, and also realistic. But for the moment, it's in a very I'm now drawing the counters or and the board. So it's I'm near finish it, but I have to test them and draft the rules, etc.
That's great. Well, I'm glad to hear you're doing multiple projects. If we were broadcasting live to our audience right now, I can guarantee you what our audience likes to do is they suggest titles and games they would like the designer to consider doing. So I'll have to come back to our recorded interview and then of course read the comments, on our YouTube channel. I'm sure people will, start typing in, I hope Javier considers this kind of a game to do, etc. But
probably I think I love this word, so probably I will take as much suggestion as possible because I love.
Well, I have to ask you this question because you're in Madrid.
Game design,
yeah. So now, since you're living in Madrid, have you actually received the game yet? I think it would take some time for you to receive it because of the pandemic and shipping. And so, do you have the game yet? Have you received the game already?
Not yet. I was contacted for the address for the delivery, but I still haven't received it. I guess that I will receive briefly. But as you said, with this COVID issue, let's see if I have it later or something like that.
Yeah, I was worried about that. That I know we have another. I did another interview just 2 weeks ago with Joe Carter, and I didn't realize Joe lives in Japan. So he did a game called Devil Boats for us, which was the previous release before yours, and he hadn't received his games in Japan. Oh, you saw it. Yeah. So I asked Joe, you're not in the States. You actually live in Japan. And he goes, yeah. And I don't have the games yet. So if people ask questions, I have all the materials, but I don't actually have the physical game like other people have already in the United States. And I go, I can imagine shipping. It's probably delayed. But he did get the game. He has since received his games, but I'm afraid you're in the same boat as Joe. I'm interviewing you about your newly released game, but you don't have it yet.
Exactly.
But
it's the same situation.
Situation. I think it's because of the situation.
No worries.
Well, listen, I want to thank you so much. I mean, this has been a wonderful opportunity to introduce you to our customers about Coalition. And I'm sorry again, just with the time zone difference and everything, it just, I was unavailable to do our normal Thursday night sessions for Compass. So we had to unfortunately do a recording of this session for Coalition, but I know everybody will watch, they'll catch this video and I'm sure they'll post comments. Just wait a few days about some game design ideas for you to consider from the audience. I'm sure they'll start doing that. But no, it was wonderful to have you, Javier. I want to thank you so much. I want to congratulate you on your design. Sounds wonderful. Sounds very playable. It sounds like it can be played quickly in a few hours with a bunch of people, which is great. So I just want to thank you again. It was a pleasure to have you on tonight. Thank you so much, Javier.
Thank you, John. I'm happy to be here with you and talking with the people.
Thank you so much. Take care. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye-bye.